Now, in this video, I want to go through a couple of improvements that we introduced into Conduit in Arinova to handle the different versions, or I would say the different snapshots of the microservice system much more easily. Now, in order to explain that, I'll focus more on a very simple pipeline. Right now, we have the train ticket set up, and this is do a very simple software architecture reconstruction, and then we will do a visualization. Now, if you run this pipeline, now one of the improvements that we have done is to allow users to assign a version number, a semantic version number, to the generated IR in order to save that or persist that as a particular snapshot of the system. Now, obviously, when you have this, now you can remain this as an unversioned snapshot of the system, but that would basically mean that the system would be considered a draft and would not really be retrievable later on. But now if you had versioned it, assigned the version and saved it with maybe also a description, and now I will basically show you how to assign the version and also the description. Now, if you have done that, now that would be retrievable, and you could be using that to compare between different versions, to do change impact analysis, and even load up that particular snapshot in order to do further analysis, maybe in terms of comparison as well. Now, for example, if let's say I want to version this particular snapshot, now what I can do is click on the assign version. Now, obviously, here you will be shown a couple of suggested versions, as well as you'll be shown what are the existing historical versions here as well. Now, for example, if you just hover on the version number, you would be told, you would be basically shown the particular description that you have assigned for this particular version when you were saving this particular snapshot at the time. Now, for example, since this is a semantic version that we want to pursue, you won't be allowed to do anything that is not following this same convention. For example, you won't be allowed to insert any letters and any other format other than this, the very standard semantic versioning numbering system. Well, for example, in my case, let me go by 1.1.9, and if I save it, I would be directed to this confirmation page where I can give the description, that, and confirm, which at this point would be assigned to the IR. Now, this particular version would be persisted in the backend as well, where we save the IR. And now, if you had changed your mind, if you want to change the version, you can obviously do that using the edit button as well. Now, once you have this, you can easily do the visualization. But now, given these versions that we have, there is also a very important improvement that we have here. Now, you might remember that we allow loading snapshots as well. So that was previously by drag and dropping any downloaded IRs. But now you can also, given the versions and the persistence that we have, you can basically search for save snapshots. And since this system is train ticket, I'll search for train ticket. Now, obviously, this doesn't need to exactly match with the system name. You can just search by train or ticket or any literal in the pattern of this particular system, and this will basically show you all the versions that are currently available. Now, since this is 1.1.9, yeah, now you might remember that system visualization basically allows to configure for two parallel system snapshots in order to compare them for change impact analysis and so forth. Now, instead of having two of these pipelines which starts from system source, generate snapshots, IR, card, and the system visualization, you can just simply load up any previous versions. Now since this is 1.1.9, let me take 1.1.7 for example, but obviously this is exactly the same configuration that I have had, so might be for that. But once you had loaded the snapshot, you can simply by convention you can do a IR cut and then that linked up here. Now obviously once you've executed this one, you would see that the version is already assigned. Now which means that you could also be using this card to edit the version as well if you think after persisting that you want to change the version number by any chance. Now obviously right now we have two separate snapshots being loaded up, right? Which means now like I have demonstrated before, if you go on to the launcher, you will basically have two separate versions. Now the interesting thing with versions is now if you expand this timeline, now you would see that there are more information, and in fact the snapshot, the version number that you see here is actually consistent with what you have assigned in the pipeline. Obviously we have added two different versions. Now I did mention that we use the same configuration, so in fact there won't be any change that you would see in the change impact analysis. But now I'll go back to the pipeline and do a little bit of a change. Now I'll remove this parallel pipeline, right? So which means now I will only have just one snapshot of the system that is loaded into the launcher. Now this is obvious. Now there aren't any other snapshots already loaded in the timeline in order to compare in between. But now there are two options that you have to compare between versions. Now there's this new load historic snapshot feature that we've introduced here. Now this again allows you to load up any particular snapshots that you want to. Now for example, if I want, and you can select as many as snapshots that you want to compare with the current version. Now in my case, let me just select this 1.7, 1.1.4, 1.1.3 for example. If I load these three up, now you could again see the metadata is taking the same features as it was. Now instead, now we would see that there are more easier and more intuitive way of showing the timeline. Now this basically allows you to not necessarily need to configure the pipeline for different comparisons of the different snapshots of the system, but rather quickly do the comparison between the different snapshot versions that you already have. Now this is obviously the manual way of doing it. Now if I go back and reset this maybe and come back to the launcher, but obviously you can reset the timeline here as well. Now another way of loading the history is to use this suggested historical data loading that you get as a suggestion. Now obviously you can select the number of snapshots that you want to load to. I'll select the just three snapshots in the history and load the history again as well. Now that would basically give you a very similar output, but now you might see that the snapshot versions that you have are the most recent three, including the current one. So I obviously selected just three, so obviously in the timeline I have only three, but those are the most recent three, right? So but in the case of loads history, you can load you doesn't need to be loading the most recent three. You could be selecting randomly at different points, but rather when you are loading it into the timeline, that will naturally be in the order of the semantic version. Now for example, if I just want to add on top of the history, I could be loading up a very older snapshot that I have saved and load it up, and interestingly, that does not have a particular version, so which means that this would be falling back to snapshot 1, 2, 3 and 4 consistently.